Okay, let's check out the synthesis section in the middle of Ultrabeat now, including everything about synthesis and the sounds of Ultrabeat. Okay, I know this is scary, but don't worry. We're going to take this chapter in 3 stages. We're going to start with just the basics of the synthesis section. Then we're going to move on and look at it in a bit more depth. And then in the third part, we're going to look at everything to do with playing loops. Because Ultrabeat, of course, plays loops as well. Ultrabeat is a very versatile little instrument. It does all your old school loop playback techniques from the early days of breakbeat, drum and bass, jungle, rave and all that kind of thing. It's a synthesizer which will do synthesis of drum sounds and synth and bass sounds. It does sample and synthesis, and of course it works as a sample playback drum box. It does a bit of everything. So with what I've taught you in the sequencer part of the tutorial already, plus what you're going to learn in this chapter, just with Ultrabeat you can do something like this. This is like a old school breakbeat thing with a bit of a techno twist. Yeah, and all that done just with Ultrabeat and the addition of a cheesy old drum loop that we all know. Okay, so let's get into it. Let me initialize a fresh copy of Ultrabeat. Now remember, we're not loading a drum machine from the library which loads a combination of instrument and mix. We're loading a raw instrument into the instrument slot on the channel strip for the instrument track. So we load a raw Ultrabeat, stereo one. And when you load a raw Ultrabeat into the slot like that, it always loads up with the factory default kit, unless you've changed your default kit. And this kit is completely synthesized. It uses no samples at all. As I say, that's the beauty of Ultrabeat. It can do drum synthesis and other synthesis. Right? Okay, so I want to begin by explaining a basic concept of synthesizers, because this is for beginners and this is a synthesizer. Okay, you choose your voice from the voice list and this is the synthesis for the selected voice. Okay, well, all synthesizers are laid out the same. Doesn't matter how simple and cheap they are or how complex and expensive. All synths are laid out the same. At the beginning of the synth you have the oscillator section, where you have a single oscillator or multiple oscillators, and that single oscillator or those multiple oscillators generate the waveform or the waveforms, the raw waveform or waveforms, and then that single oscillator waveform or the combination of those multiple oscillator waveforms is fed into the following parts of the synthesizer, which mangle and modify and manipulate the oscillator or the multiple oscillators combined to get the sound that you hear. And Ultrabeat is exactly the same, because it's a synth. Ultrabeat is a 1, 2, 3 oscillator synthesizer. Okay. Up at the top here, this is oscillator number 1, this whole section including this round bit. Down at the bottom here, this is oscillator number 2, this whole section including this round bit. And in the middle we have oscillator number 3, this whole section including this round bit. But oscillator number 3 is a noise generating oscillator only. It can only make noise type waveforms. So Ultrabeat is a 1, 2, 3 oscillator synth, and the oscillators are these purple plum coloured areas. So all the voices in all your kits are made with any combination of these 3 oscillators. In the case of this factory default kit, the kick drum is made with just 1 oscillator plus synthesis that follows. The snare is made with all 3 oscillators plus synthesis that follows. The rim shot is made with all 3 oscillators plus synthesis that follows. And the claps is made with just the noise generating oscillator plus synthesis that follows, etc. Right? Alright. Okay, so let's check out the oscillators. Oscillator number 1 up here can be a phase oscillator generating a waveform, or it can be a sidechain object or a frequency modulator, but we're keeping it simple. We're not going to look at sidechain or FM. So all you need to know is that oscillator number 1 can be a phase oscillator generating a waveform. Oscillator number 2 at the bottom can be exactly the same, a phase oscillator identical to the top oscillator generating a waveform. But it can also generate its waveform from a model, but we're not looking at that, we're keeping it simple. Or oscillator number 2 at the bottom here can also generate its waveform from a loaded sample. So any voices in your kits that use samples, the samples will always be down in the bottom oscillator here, which will be switched to sample like that, and you'll see the waveform of the sample in the window there. Okay, and then the noise oscillator here can generate noise waveforms only. Right, so bearing in mind the bottom oscillator here can be a phase oscillator identical to the top oscillator. Let's look at this top oscillator. Alright, this is a phase oscillator. It generates a waveform. There's the default waveform in the window, a soft sine wave like rounded waveform that generates a soft rounded tone. Okay, now this is single oscillator doing this soft rounded sine like waveform is generating the kick drum for this kit. Okay, and yes, the synthesis that follows that gives the kick its thump and everything like that, but essentially this oscillator, this soft rounded waveform, gives a soft rounded tone. Okay, and then you can mess with the waveform that's being generated with a combination of slope, saturation and symmetry. Okay, saturation changes the waveform from soft rounded sine wave like all the way up to square wave, so from soft to honking, okay, like this. Okay, symmetry skews the waveform, making the leading and trailing edge more and more square. This adds buzz. Okay, and finally slope squishes the waveform. Look, see how it's getting squished, which has the effect of making the sound more trebly and squelchy. Have a listen. More trebly and squelchy. More trebly and squelchy. More trebly and squelchy. Okay, so you mess with the slope, saturation and symmetry to get the waveform sound you want. And then the signal goes across to the pitch section here. This is the pitch for the oscillator. Okay, this red slider is the coarse pitch, or you drag the pitch semitone display there. So you tune the oscillator coarse by dragging on the slider or dragging on the semitone display, like that. And you can fine tune the pitch by dragging on the sense display. Okay, or shift and drag on the actual red slider to fine tune. Okay. And to reset the oscillator to its default pitch, you are Alt left click on either the red slider or the semitone display. Alt left click, boom, and it resets to its default pitch of C3. And you reset the fine tune by Alt left clicking on the cent display. Boom. Okay. Now this red pitch slider has got these two handles on it, a blue and green handle. Don't worry about these blue and green handles that you see on some of the parameters. We're going to look at those in the next bit when we go into the synthesis deeper. We're just keeping it simple, right? Okay, so waveform, you set it the one you want, you set the pitch, and then finally this red pot in the middle of this central bit here with the dimple, yeah, this sets the volume of the signal leaving this oscillator section. Okay, quieter or louder. It's as simple as that. Alright. Okay, so I'm going to put this oscillator back down to A0, the kick drum pitch it was at before, like that. There we go. So that's how the phase oscillator works. Waveform, pitch, and the volume of the signal leaving the oscillator. And the bottom one, of course, is identical. Okay, now let's look at this noise generating oscillator. Here it is. It only generates noise waveforms, and you've got a filter, low pass, high pass and band pass. I can't get into a filter tutorial now, but they're fairly simple if you look them up. And there's a bypass for the filter completely. So you set your noise wave type, you know, the type of noise that's being generated by this oscillator, using a combination of the filter, the filter type, the cutoff, the resonance, and there's a dirt control as well. like that. And that's your noise waveform, third oscillator. Okay, so if you have a single oscillator active, no matter which one it is, the red volume pot simply sets the level of the signal leaving that oscillator going off to the rest of the synthesizer. If you've got multiple oscillators activated, then you balance the level that you want between the active oscillators using their red volume controls to get the balance, the blend that you want between active oscillators going off through to the rest of the synthesizer. Okay, so let's take out the noise, and we've got the top oscillator here at a pitch of A0 doing a soft rounded sine-like tone. We'll bring in the bottom oscillator doing the same waveform, and that's set at a pitch of A1, an octave higher. So I'll now blend the balance between the two oscillators with the red volume control to get the balance I want, like that. Less of the deep oscillator, less of the high-pitched oscillator, you know. And once you've got the balance between active oscillators that you want with their red volume controls, that sets the balance that goes off then into the rest of the synthesizer. Okay. Now, any active oscillators can optionally be switched into this central filter distortion area by just activating their red arrows like that. Okay, so that's 3 oscillators active, all being fed into the filter distortion, or just these 2 oscillators being fed in but not the noise oscillator, you know, or just the bottom oscillator here feeding into the filter distortion but not the other 2. Any combination of active oscillators can be fed into this central filter distortion or not. Okay, so I'm feeding both the oscillators, the oscillator number 1 here, the A0 pitched one, and the oscillator number 2 here, the A1 pitched oscillator. They're both being fed into the filter distortion. And here you've got a filter with low pass, high pass, bandpass and bandpass reject, 2 different types of slope, steepnesses of slope 12 and 24 dB, and you've got a cutoff and resonance, so you can filter like that, and you've got distortion, 2 types, crusher or distort. Okay. Now you can apply either just filter or either of the 2 types of distortion, or you can have distortion and filter. Now if you're only applying filter but not distortion, or you're only applying distortion but not filter, right, then this arrow in the middle, which by default points down, just leave it, but when you click on it, it changes direction. Okay. Now if you're using a combination of filter and distortion, then it's best to have the arrow pointing up, and then the signal flow is distortion through into the filter. With the signal flow like that, distortion feeding into the filter, you get the range from the cutoff you expect, all the way from very soft to treble. In the case of a low pass filter, or in the high pass, you know, the same, or the band pass, or the band reject. Yeah, basically, if the arrow's pointing up, the distortion, the signals, the oscillators going into this section go from the distortion through to the filter, and you get the range from this cutoff control you expect. If the arrow's pointing down, the signal goes from filter through to the distortion. You get less range on the cutoff. Okay, but that's not a hard and fast rule, but generally speaking, if filter and distortion are being used, have the arrow pointing up. Okay. So, whether or not the active oscillators are fed into the filter distortion, then the signal flow, the combination of all active oscillators, goes across to 2 bands of EQ. Remember, we're keeping it simple. Okay, we're not going to look at this ring mod. So the signal now goes across to 2 bands of EQ here. Okay, here. I'll take the filter. I'll take the filter and distortion off. So now the signal goes across to the 2 bands of EQ. Okay, both bands can be shelving or peak. Okay, so let's look at band 1. It could be a shelving EQ like that. Okay, choose the frequency, cut or boost. Yeah, change frequency, boost or cut. Change the slope like that. Or it could be a peak EQ, boost or cut. Change the frequency, push pull to change the Q, or move the frequency control or the Q control here. Okay. And the top band can again be a shelving EQ, giving you a high shelf, cut or boost, slope, like that. Or it can be a peak EQ as well, exactly the same as the bottom one. Frequency, change the Q, or drag for the frequency, push pull for the Q, boost or cut. Okay, that's your EQ. Now, in the third chapter, I'm going to show you everything you need to know about setting up multiple output ultrabeats, where any voices in the kit that you want can be assigned to their own separate outputs with their own channel on the Logic mixer. In which case, of course, you can use the channel EQ to apply EQ to individual voices on their own channel. Okay, but some people like to use the EQ, especially if it's quite drastic EQ that contributes greatly to the sound of the voice patch. You know, they like to include that EQ as part of the whole voice patch. You know, like, you know, every voice, when you choose it, this is the synthesis patch for the voice. You know, the combination of oscillators, synthesis, etc. Right. So, if, you know, you can have the EQ as part of the voice patch, whether or not it's going to its own separate out. But if, like now, you've got Ultrabeat working in stereo, where all the voices in the kit go to the main left, right, out, then this is the only EQ available per voice. Okay, but there's your EQ. Alright. And then, let's just change the EQ slightly like that. Okay, and then finally, there are 2 more things to look at. The signal goes across to the voice volume here. Okay, again, there's a green slider on this volume pot. Don't worry about that. We can look at these sliders in the next bit. I'll take it off. This blue pot is the volume for the voice. The voice being the combination of all active oscillators, right? So this simply sets the voice volume, quieter or louder. Okay, and then the signal goes to the amp envelope here. Every voice patch has got 1, 2, 3, 4 envelopes, and this is the amplitude envelope for the voice. This sets the attack time for the voice, how long it takes to come in when it's triggered. So if you've got a longer attack time, the voice kind of fades in. Short attack times, it comes in quicker and quicker, or right to the left is instant attack. And then you've got your decay part of the envelope here, the amplitude envelope decay time. This is how long the voice takes to completely die away to silence when it's been triggered. You have a long decay time, or shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. Yeah. So this sets how long the amplitude envelope decay sets how long it takes the voice to completely decay away to silence. And you've got a zoom here to zoom in and out. Okay. And the attack and decay part of the envelope have got vector handles to make the decay and the attack curve be anything you want. Okay. That's it, and then the signal goes across the voice slot here, where this blue slider sets the level of that voice leaving the instrument, and there's a pan control for the voice as well, and mute and solo. That's it. It's as simple as that. That's the signal flow. Now, of course, the bottom oscillator can generate its waveform from a loaded sample, so let's look at that now. Let's load up a kit that uses samples, the Boutique SP12. Here we go. Let's listen to the first factory pattern. Okay, this kit uses samples for all of its voices, so every voice that you select, the bottom oscillator is active, switched to sample, and there's the sample in the window for the voice. Okay, now let's clear the pattern. We covered all this in the sequence part of the tutorial. I'll set the pattern to 16 steps long. I'll put a simple 4 on the floor for the kick. There we go. Right, there's the kick drum, and it's using a sample, of course, and there's the sample in the bottom oscillator. But notice the top oscillator is also active. Aha. Yeah. So this kick drum sound is being created with a combination of a sample oscillator and a phase oscillator. Let me turn the phase oscillator up loud. Have a listen. Out. In. Okay, so this kick drum sound is being created by the two oscillators. The bottom oscillator is the sample, and that gives the attack, the tone, and the character of the actual kick. But there's a sub oscillator underneath, playing a deep booming tone at G0. Now this is quite a common technique in kick drums, to have a sample with a sub oscillator underneath it, giving a at the bottom end. And it's especially common in genres that use big heavy kick drums. So that's what's happening here. And where you use a sub oscillator, you blend in the amount of the sub oscillator you want and its pitch, etc. Okay, let's just isolate the sample oscillator. Here we go. This is just the sample. There it is. And there's no synthesis really applied to this voice at all. No filter distortion, no EQ, nothing. So you're hearing the sample pretty much raw. Okay, now you can reverse the sample with this arrow. Like that, or play it the right way around. To the right of the sample window, there's this slider thing here. Don't worry about that. You don't need to worry with that. That's only used rarely if you import specially prepared layered samples which have been set up in the XS sampler. And you can't layer samples in Ultrabeat by itself, so don't worry with that. And besides, all the samples that load with all the kits, you know, all the voices that use samples, they use single one-shot samples. Drum boxes just use single samples. I can't think of a drum box going back in history that ever used samples layered by velocity. Okay. So there's your sample in the window. You can reverse it or have it playing the correct way round. And there's this also this max and min sliders. Now this is not maximus and minimus from Gladiator. This is maximum and minimum, although obviously those two words come from the Latin. Yeah, now these are used to set the start time of the sample, where it begins playing back from, with different velocity notes. Maximum being where the sample begins playing back from with the loudest notes, working down in velocity to minimum where the sample plays back from with the lowest velocity notes. But we don't use this maximus and minimus in, you know, when we're triggering simple one-shot drum samples. These only come into play when we start using longer bits of audio like loops, which we're going to cover in the third part of this chapter. So we'll look at these when we look at playing loops. Okay, so there's the sample. Now above there's a drop-down list. There's the title of the sample. You can show it in the Finder, you can unload it, or you can load a fresh sample. So let's look at loading samples. But before we do, there's no synthesis on this voice at the moment. We've taken out the sub oscillator, so it's just a one oscillator voice being generated from a sample. Okay, we know how it works. Pitch, coarse or fine, and this is the level leaving the oscillator. Okay, one thing to note though, that when you reset the pitch with a sample oscillator, alt left click, right, it resets to the default of C3. That doesn't mean the sample's playing at the pitch of C3. It simply means the oscillator is at its default pitch, so you're hearing the sample at its natural pitch. If you tune up from C3, you're tuning the sample up. If you tune down from C3, you're detuning the sample. Okay. So before I load a sample, let's add some synthesis. I'm going to feed the sample oscillator into the filter and distortion. Like that. Okay, now clearly you can hear there's some distortion now. And we'll add a little bit of EQ. Like that, so. Okay, so now we've added some synthesis to this single oscillator voice. Filter, distortion and some EQ. Now we go to load a sample. Check this out. We load a sample and it opens the Finder window. And by default it always takes you to your Ultrabeat samples location. And these are all the kits. Each kit has its own folder, and in each folder is all the samples for that kit. But of course you can browse to any disk locations on your Mac you want, or to any attached hard drives, or to even network drives. And don't worry about loading samples from attached hard disks or network disks. You might think, oh well, if I load a sample from that location, then in the future when I reload the project, that disk might not be attached or available on the network, and the sample won't load and my project won't have the same sounds. When you save your project, there is an option to back up all samples used in the project into the project folder, so don't worry about getting your samples, your own samples from other disk locations. Okay, now this load sample dialog is very clever. It's got a nice audition feature. You click play and initially you hear the current sample that's loaded playing raw. If there's any synthesis on the voice, you don't hear it going through the synthesis, you hear it raw. And it keeps triggering until you click stop. Now while play is activated, you can click and audition at any samples and they trigger instantly and you hear them raw. Okay, not going through this, any synthesis applied to the voice. Okay, so and once you can audition, and when you leave a voice highlighted, a sample highlighted, sorry, it just keeps on triggering until you choose another one, or until you click stop, and you hear the samples that you're auditioning raw. But here's the clever bit: if you preview sample in Ultrabeat Voice, you then have the luxury of hearing the samples as you audition them in place, as if they were already loaded into the Ultrabeat with the current voice synthesis applied to them. It's very clever, so you can hear them as if they were already loaded, and you can hear what they'll be like when they're loaded with the synthesis applied to that voice. Without synthesis, with the synthesis. Clever, huh? Okay, so there you go. Right, so I'm going to load up a nice juicy 808 kick. Here we go. That one, boom, loaded. Let's take the oscillator out of the filter distortion. Let's turn off the EQ, and we're hearing it raw now, like that. Here we go. Let's turn it up a bit. Okay, now I'm going to go to the amplitude envelope here. Now the decay time is set to just over a second. Alright, we'll come back to that. So there's your sample. You know how it works. You can tune it, set the level, leaving the oscillator, optionally send it into the filter distortion, apply EQ. That's the volume for the voice, the sample oscillator, and any other oscillator that may be active. There's only one thing that's, and then the signal goes to the amp envelope and across the voice slot, but there's only one thing that you need to pay attention to when you've got sample voices. If it's a sample only voice and no additional oscillator is layered with it, this sample, for example, lasts for 1 second. It's a booming long 808 kick. Right? So the amp envelope decay, which is how long the voice lasts before it decays completely to silence, there's no point having this longer than a second because it has no effect. The sample finishes playing around here. So this amp envelope decay will only make a difference once you bring the time in shorter than the length of the sample, and then the sample plays back less and less of its length because the amp envelope decay is shutting the voice down to silence before the sample can finish playing. Okay, and of course the attack is the same as usual. It's how fast it fades in. A slow fade up or an instant attack. Okay, there you go. That's it. Easy peasy, right? It's so simple. And just with those basics, you can really tweak your sounds and get creative just with those basics. So the signal flow, all active oscillators. Okay, set the waveform or the sample, set the pitch, and then balance the volume of the oscillators. Optionally feed them into the filter distortion, then across the two bands VQ, the voice volume, the volume for the voice, the combination of all active oscillators, then the amplitude envelope, the attack time of the voice, the decay time of the voice, and then across to its own slot where the blue slider sets the level and the pan sets the pan position for the voice leaving the instrument. Shimples. Okay, now there's just a few other things. You can import voices, right, from any other kit into the current kit, and you do that with the import up here, right? Click import, it takes you to your Ultrabeat kits location. Each of these PST files is an actual whole drum kit. So if I want to import voices from, let's say, the Boutique 909, I choose the Boutique 909 kit, click open, and this drop down list appears, and these are all the voices in the Boutique 909 kit, whether they're sample based or synthesized. And you can click an audition, all the voices in that kit, and then you can drag and drop the voices into your current kit in any voice slot position. You don't have to, like if I want to import this rim shot, I don't have to import it into the voice slot opposite. I can drag and drop it to any voice slot in my current kit, like that. Boom. And now that 909 rim is in my current kit. Now when you drag and drop voices, import and drag and drop them into your current kit in any voice slot position, it doesn't change the MIDI note number. Okay, the MIDI note numbers for the voices stays the same, starting at the kick at C1 and working up in semitones to the top voice, which is on C3. Okay, and then when you finished importing from that kit, you close that, and that's that. Or you import from another kit. Repeat the procedure. Classic UK hip hop, and I might want to import that clap. I'll drag and import it to, let's say, there. Boom. And now I've got two claps. That one, which I've just imported, and the original. Yeah, so easy peasy. Okay, the other thing you can do is you can right click and you can copy a voice and paste it to another position. Copy voice and sequences. Well, we covered what copying sequences means in the sequencer part of the tutorial. So you copy voice and sequences, like I'll copy the kick, go to any other voice slot, right click and paste that voice in. So I've copied the voice from there and pasted it into there. They're now identical. Okay, and again, when you copy a voice and paste it into another voice slot, it doesn't change the MIDI note number of that voice. Okay, and also you can initialize any voice slot to any of these vanilla starting points to synthesize these types of sounds. Okay, this gives you a vanilla starting point synthesis of these sounds, or you can set the voice initialize ready to load a sample. Okay, and that's it. Apart from saving, now once you've loaded up a kit, you've changed some of the samples, you've edited the voices, you've tweaked the synthesis for the different voices, etc. And once you've finished and you want to save it, you go to the top here and you do save or save as. Now if you save, you'll overwrite the kit, whichever you started with. And if it's a factory kit and you click save, you will overwrite that factory kit. So you can do save as and save it on any disk location you like with a different title. And save as kits appear here. There's ones that I've done save as, and all the factory ones are still there. Right, and that's it. So that's the basics, and you can do a lot with the basics, right? But what we're going to do is, we're now going to go to the second part of this chapter where we're going to look at these blue and green slider handles that you see on some of the parameter controls. We're going to look at these, okay, the principle of how they work and their relationship to the LFO Well, the blue slider handles relationship to the LFOs and the envelopes, and the green slider handles relationship to velocity, right? And we're going to go in a bit deeper, and in the next bit I'm going to show you how these blue and green slider handles work. We'll look at the envelopes and LFO, and we'll also, in the next bit, learn the basic fundamental principle for creating a drum type sound. Okay, so I'll see you for the next bit.